So all of us are exposed to PFAS chemicals day in and day out. Whether or not you eat food packaging from McDonald's or Burger King or wear a rain jacket at REI, this is an issue that affects every single one of your listeners, every single American.
Welcome to the Wise Consumer Podcast, the answer to your eco-friendly and healthy lifestyle questions. How to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals, whether or not it's normal to have a painful period, how to live an eco-friendly lifestyle on a budget, and more. With the help of experts, I'm talking scientists, toxicologists, endocrinologists, cosmetic chemists. You'll get knowledge and know-how to your most pressing health concerns and sustainability questions straight from the source. I'm Madeline Weisskopf, your host, confidant, and in-house science nerd, here on a mission to help empower, inspire, and support you in your own health and eco journey. Because, friend, I am a firm believer that if you don't feel good, you can't do good. So, pour yourself a cup of tea, kick off your shoes, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Do you remember when you'd come home from school and you'd show your parents a report card and they'd just be so proud of you and your grades that they'd stick that report card right up on the fridge for everyone to see? And each time you'd open that refrigerator door, you'd feel a sense of accomplishment, pride, and motivation to keep bringing home those good grades. Do you remember those days? I can't say that I personally do, as my grades weren't always, quote, fridge worthy, but that's beside the point. All jokes aside, there's something to be said about having your grades displayed that motivates you to do better, right? Or at least to a certain extent. So what if we could apply that same grading and displaying concept to some of our nation's leading retailers, evaluating them on the actions they take to restrict the usage of toxic chemicals along their supply chains and in their consumer products and packaging materials? Could ranking brands against each other and publicly displaying their grades actually help bring about positive change in the marketplace and help to reduce the usage of harmful chemicals in consumer products? And if so, how would they be rated, and how do you think your favorite companies would score? Here to answer some of these questions is Mike Schade, the campaign director for Mind the Store. Mind the Store, a program of Toxic-Free Future, challenges the nation's leading retailers to transform the marketplace away from hazardous chemicals such as PFAS, flame retardants, phthalates, and others towards safer alternatives. In this episode, we're also digging into all things PFAS, also known as per and polyfluoro-alkyl substances, a class of harmful chemicals that, as you'll hear, affects all Americans. If you're curious as to what PFAS are, why they're harmful, and how you might be able to reduce your exposure to these, quote, forever chemicals, then keep listening as Mike helps to answer all of these questions and more. This was truly an eye-opening conversation and one I am eager for you to tune into, especially if, similar to me, you're looking for ways to reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals. So, without further ado, let's get started. All right, Mike, thank you so much for being on the Wise Consumer Podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and my listeners, and really want to welcome you here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I want to start this conversation off by asking you a little bit about the journey that led you here. I'm really interested. I'm curious to hear what has inspired you to become an advocate for the removal of harmful chemicals from mainly consumer products in our environment throughout your career. I'm just really curious, like the journey that led you here.
Yeah. Well, I think I really kind of garnered somewhat of an environmental ethic as a kid growing up in Long Island. I would spend a lot of summers at the beach, at Jones Beach, and I think that really fostered a sense of environmental awareness and responsibility, spending a lot of time by the ocean as a kid. And in college, I was originally going to be a graphic designer. And, as I got, interested in corporate responsibility and environmental sustainability issues, I was like, well, do I really want to spend my life designing things, convincing people to buy things that they don't really need?
Yeah.
And, as I thought more and more about my interests, I eventually switched majors to environmental studies. And in college, I took a class called The History of the Grassroots Environmental Movement. And that's where, this is in Buffalo, New York. And Buffalo, New York is not too far from a place called Love Canal. Love Canal was a community where a housing development, middle-class housing, was built on top of 20,000 tons of toxic waste. And Love Canal was really a wake-up call for this country when folks were like, oh, maybe it's not such a good idea to build a school and homes on top of 20,000 tons of some of the most dangerous chemicals known to mankind. And, the story of Love Canal really inspired me, especially this idea that, it was really ordinary citizens, literally housewives, who started going door to door and organized their community and really led a major campaign to get the government to close down the school, to relocate the families living at Love Canal. And that helped spark the federal Superfund program, the program that cleans up the nation's toxic waste sites. But for me, I was really kind of inspired by the power of ordinary people to impact incredible change. And that really kind of got me interested in kind of the intersection of the environment, public health, and corporate responsibility, and kind of those intersections, and also the intersection with occupational health, because there's a long, rich history of activism among workers as well. And there was some overlap there at Love Canal too, in terms of some occupational safety and health connections. But the story of Love Canal really got me interested in working on toxics, especially going to school up in Buffalo. Buffalo is I used to think kind of like the Cancer Alley of New York State, in that the Western New York region around Buffalo was home to many landfills, chemical plants, incinerators, toxic waste sites. Historically, Western New York was kind of like the dumping ground of waste in New York State. So going to school up there, meeting folks that were working on the Love Canals of today really got me interested in working on this. And so, I was a student activist. I was working on different campaigns as a student activist, really doing a lot of corporate accountability work. And, that got me also interested to work on corporate accountability. And then I think kind of the Love Canal story really got me interested in toxics. So as a student activist, kind of the mix of getting excited about corporate accountability and market transformation campaigns, and kind of the intersection between toxics, the environment, public health, all kind of gelled. And about a year after graduating college, I got a job directing the Buffalo office of this statewide grassroots environmental health organization, where I was literally working hand in hand with community members across Buffalo and across Western New York who were working on the Love Canals of today, folks that were working to get toxic waste sites cleaned up in their communities, folks that were working to find out why was the air polluted in their neighborhood, and then also policy change, working to enact precautionary policies at the state level to get dangerous toxic waste sites cleaned up and get harmful chemicals and plastics off the market. So ever since then, I've been on a 20 plus year journey working at the intersection of kind of environment and public health.
And the conclusion with Love Canal, if I'm correct, they've said that it's been primarily, just out of curiosity, it's kind of been cleaned up and it's less toxic nowadays? Where does it stand?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. A lot for some sites like Love Canal that are particularly large, sometimes the government may decide to not do a full cleanup, but what they'll do is they'll treat it, they'll cap it, maybe they'll remove the worst of the worst waste, like literally, 50-gallon barrel drums filled with hazardous chemicals, as there was at Love Canal.
Jeez.
But what they did instead, in addition to, what they cleaned up the barrels of waste, there were many of them. Eventually they capped it and turned it into a permanent landfill, while at the same time relocating the families, shutting down the schools that were there. There were 2 schools. And in some respects, it's almost like a ghost town. You go there and you can actually see where people's homes once were, because you can actually see there's literally these vacant fields with trees, and you can literally see where the foundations were, where people's homes were. It almost kind of reminds me of something out of The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
So it's mostly been cleaned up, but a lot of the waste is still there. It's capped in a landfill. Sadly, though, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was evidence that, because in the 1990s, 2000s, they eventually started resettling Love Canal. They
Mm-hmm.
started building homes again around it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some evidence that the landfill at Love Canal was starting to leak again. So it seemed that history was starting to repeat itself. And honestly, I'm not sure where that stands,
Mm-hmm.
but it was mostly cleaned up. And thankfully, the folks that lived there back in the 1970s, whose children went to school on top of Love Canal, whose homes were built on top of and next to Love Canal, they were definitely made whole and they were relocated. And there's a book that was written by Lois Gibbs, who is someone that I had the pleasure of working with for a number of years. She wrote a really fantastic book that kind of tells the story of Love Canal from the perspective of one of these community activists. It's called Love Canal, My Story. And I definitely recommend checking it out. It was republished a few years ago by Island Press. And pretty sure you could probably get it through Amazon or even the local bookstore. So it's definitely worth checking out. It's a really amazing and incredible story that really doesn't get told enough. A lot of people know about Erin Brockovich, but not enough people know about Lois Gibbs and the families at Love Canal. And it's a real incredible story.
Yeah, I'll make sure to find that and link it in the show notes for anyone who's interested in reading about it.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. Yeah.
I feel like we could do a whole episode on these kind of things. And like, it just makes my heart sink when I think about like chemicals leaking and everything. But I do want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about what you're currently working on, which I think is just so amazing. And I absolutely love it. So you're the campaign director for Mind the Store, correct? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. And the retailer report card, I'm assuming most of my listeners aren't very familiar with this campaign. And I would love for you to kind of give us an overview, like what is Mind the Store? What is its mission? And how does it all work?
Yeah. Well, in my early days of my career, I was really doing a lot of work on kind of the cleanup side of things, right? Getting toxic waste sites cleaned up, getting polluting landfills shut down. And over the years, I really, sort of shifted my thinking, like, we really need to prevent these problems from happening in the first place, right? We're never going to solve these issues if we only focus on cleanup. And that's not to say we should stop focusing on cleanup. Absolutely. It's critical to protect and safeguard communities that suffer from a legacy of industrial pollution. But at the same time, we need to prevent harm, right? There's tens of thousands of chemicals on the market. And there's hundreds of which we know impose really serious risks to public health and the environment. So we launched our Mind the Store campaign back in 2013 to essentially say to retailers, hey, you sell products, some of which contain really nasty, harmful chemicals that can be hazardous not only to your customers, but also to the communities and the workers where products are made and disposed of.
Right.
And, unfortunately, while we've made some progress at the federal level over the last 10 years in addressing certain chemicals, the federal government is really not doing good enough of a job to regulate harmful chemicals that are used to make everyday consumer products. So we launched our Mind the Store campaign to challenge the nation's biggest retailers to leverage their market power and influence to get tough on toxic chemicals, to reduce and eliminate the worst of the worst chemicals that we know scientific studies have shown are linked to serious health problems like cancer, like asthma, infertility, learning and developmental disabilities, where the science is clear that the chemicals can be hazardous to our health. We're calling on these retailers, companies like Walmart and Amazon and Home Depot and Sephora, Burger King, McDonald's, to use their power and influence to be good corporate citizens and to drive their suppliers to eliminate these so that not only their customers are protected, we the consumers, the wise consumers that are shopping at these stores, but also, again, for the communities and the workers where these products are made and disposed of, because we're concerned about the entire life cycle of how chemicals are made and disposed of.
I absolutely love this. And when I was just telling a friend, I did report and research on nail polish, for instance. And they're finding like
Mm,
nail polish in some ways, like, yes, for the average consumer, if you're using it every so often, it's maybe not the quote unquote end of the world. There's obviously some
right.
studies that show that, there are some potential effects, but really it's the people who are constantly working with these chemicals. You think your nail salons and all the manufacturers and everything. So I love that you guys are including the whole entire supply chain. I think we often forget, like, people are behind the scenes and working with these chemicals to
Oh
make
yeah.
something,
Right. Right. Right.
daily. And I think that's just so important to think about when you're thinking about these large organizations that you're working with. Um,
Right.
what are some of the organizations that you're currently? I think you guys are up to 50 right now that you're rating on your report card, correct?
Yeah. So one of the tools of the campaign that we've deployed over the years to drive change is to put out an annual report card that grades retailers on their chemical policies or lack thereof. A couple of years into the campaign, we were like, okay, well, let's take a step back. We started by focusing on the top 10 US retailers by sales. And we were like, okay, well, let's grade these retailers and see, well, how are they doing? How are they doing when it comes to meeting the rising consumer demand for safe and healthy products? And in the early days of the campaign, most were not doing too much at all.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the retailers we were looking at, could really be characterized as real laggards. And we've steadily expanded the campaign over the years to evaluate a much larger universe of retailers. So the first year we evaluated 10 retailers. The second year we evaluated 30, and now we're up to 50 retailers who are retailers that are market leaders in key sectors where chemicals of concern are commonly found. Everything from big box stores like Walmart and Target to home improvement chains like the Home Depot,
Mm-hmm.
online retailers like Amazon, beauty retailers like Sephora and Ulta. We think that these companies, as market leaders in their sectors, can really be powerful
Yeah.
actors for change. And we've found over the years by grading these companies publicly, no one wants to get an F, no one wants
Mm-hmm.
to get a D. And by publicly grading them, this is helping to drive change because the companies that are getting better grades, this is incentivizing them to continue to do well. And then at the same time, those that are at the bottom of the bunch, the laggards, the problematic grades, those getting letter grades of D or an F, this has helped to motivate them to improve over time to address the chemical safety of their products and their supply chains.
Yeah. Do you work with these organizations, or are they just kind of aware that there's this retail card that consumers are able to get this information on?
Oh yeah, no, we absolutely do work with companies. With the campaign, we work both behind the scenes to engage companies
Mm.
in proactive, meaningful dialogue, providing examples of model policies, providing information, technical assistance on safer alternatives, providing case studies of how other companies have addressed these challenges. So, and the way that we evaluate companies is we essentially have 13 criterion that we benchmark companies against. And then we look at what sort of information companies have on their websites. We'll look at their corporate social responsibility and their sustainability reports. And then we'll literally grade the companies based on what they're sharing publicly, right? Because we think it's important for companies to be transparent
Yeah.
about their chemical sustainability programs or lack thereof. And then what we do is we send them their draft scores and be like, hey, here's what we did. Here's what we found. Is this right? Is there information that's missing? And
Mm.
also, here are things that you can do in the year ahead
I love
to
that.
improve. And we found that that has been helpful in not only building greater trust with the companies, but
Yeah.
really helping to hold their hand to point out, hey, here are the steps that you can take to improve in the year and the years ahead to improve the chemical safety of the products that you sell, whether it's food packaging or nail polish or building materials, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I have two thoughts for that. First and
Yeah.
foremost, I imagine that it is not easy for a huge brand, like let's just say Walmart, for instance, to get this report
Yeah.
card and they're thinking like, "Oh my goodness, yeah, you're right. There are these toxic chemicals in our food packaging or whatever." And now we have to all of a sudden change everything. So I imagine it takes time and it's not necessarily easy. So having someone who can help them, guide them a little bit, it must be somewhat helpful. And also I'd love to for you to kind of share, like, it is not easy to make these changes from one day to the next.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely challenging in many cases. I mean, one of the challenges that many retailers face is that generally there's a lack of supply chain transparency around chemical ingredients and products.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Walmart, sometimes you may not know what chemicals
Right.
are in your products. So one of the questions that we evaluate companies on is around business to business disclosure. You're a Walmart, you're a Target, do you require suppliers to disclose ingredients to you so you can understand whether or not there are chemicals of concern in your supply chain? This business to business disclosure is really critical so that companies can understand, where are the pain points. The good news, though, is I will say that with many classes of chemicals of high concern, with many product categories that are out there, I would say 9 times out of 10, there are safer alternatives that are available, that are in reach, that companies can switch to in a relatively short order. Or there are, if a Walmart was to say to suppliers, hey, we'd like you to transition to safer alternatives, that market signal that a company like Walmart sends, that can have massive effects on a supply chain, because sometimes they're just safer alternatives just sitting on a supplier's shelf. They haven't brought it to market because they haven't heard of the demand from their customers. So a couple of examples of that, we were working to ban methylene chloride, which is a deadly chemical that was used in paint removal products sold by companies like the Home Depot and Lowe's. And for over a year, Home Depot and Lowe's were saying to us, well, there's not enough alternatives available, et cetera, et cetera. But after a year of engagement, and then after months of public campaigning, we were able to win commitments from not only Lowe's and the Home Depot, but about a dozen other major home improvement retailers who were able to transition away from methylene chloride and another chemical in these paint removal products within less than a year's time.
Wow.
So sometimes there are alternatives that are available that companies can transition to relatively quick time. Another example is we've been working to drive PFAS out of food packaging. We've been working on this for about 2.5 years now. And just over the last couple of years, we've won commitments from close to 20 major fast food companies and grocery store chains that have actually made progress in transitioning away from PFAS relatively quickly. So for example, Wendy's, Sweetgreen, and Chipotle all announced that they could transition to alternatives to PFAS within a year's time. So a lot of times companies can actually transition relatively quickly. For other chemical product combinations, it may be a little bit more challenging. It really depends on the situation. Are there available alternatives? Are they cost competitive? Are they, do they meet the performance standards that a retailer or supplier demands? So it is complicated, but a lot of times for many chemicals that we are concerned about, the good news is that safer alternatives are often within reach. There's just not always enough political will from companies to do the right thing. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to create more of the demand and to create the space for that political will to take place. And we found this report card can really be an effective driver of change in conjunction with other activities of our campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that explanation. I think it's so important. And also for anyone, I highly recommend going to the retail report card, because what I found to be interesting was like maybe a brand in 2016 was rated an F, but through working with you slowly but surely, they may not have an A+ right now. I'm thinking of Amazon in particular, but they're like a C+ now. And you guys have been slowly helping them change certain things. And so I think it's just really inspiring and encouraging to see, like you said, like for the paint thinners or paint removal and just little changes like that actually have big impact. Again, going back to workers, if someone's painting houses all day long, they're the ones who are inhaling these fumes, so
right.
It's really important.
Yeah. The other thing just to mention that we didn't touch on, and that's to say, absolutely, we're very much concerned about the workers, the communities where products are made and disposed of. It's also worth noting that there's a growing body of scientific evidence that demonstrates that consumers can be at risk too for certain chemicals. particularly chemicals that are fundamentally hazardous, like carcinogens, but as well as chemicals that we call endocrine or hormone disrupting chemicals,
Yeah.
chemicals that can be dangerous even at very low levels of exposure. Historically, scientists used to say, well, the dose makes the poison.
Yeah.
We only need to be concerned about very high levels of exposure. But the science over the last 20, 30 years has really flipped that on its head. And if you speak to scientists who study certain chemicals like phthalates, like flame retardants, like bisphenols, some chemicals like those can be hazardous even at low levels of exposure and can pose significant risks, particularly to vulnerable populations,
Yeah.
such as young children, such as pregnant women, such as infants in the womb. So it's also worth noting that we're concerned not only about the communities and the workers where chemicals are made and disposed of, but consumers can be at risk as well, especially because day in and day out, we're being exposed to a barrage of chemicals, from chemicals in cleaning products to cosmetics to your clothing to food packaging. And oftentimes it's not just one exposure that we're concerned about, but it's cumulative and the synergistic exposure combined that we're especially concerned about. So that's, I think, just worth noting, because especially we're on the Wise Consumer podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is also material and important for consumers as well, especially, again, women of childbearing age and pregnant women. It's definitely a big concern. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Just
I'm so glad you did. And that really was the catalyst behind why I started my podcast. Because as I was luckily misdiagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And the only thing that they were able to find out, that the only thing that they could attribute it to was the products that you're eating, or the foods that you're eating. I mean, the products you're putting on your skin, or the foods that you're eating. And that's why I've brought on in season 3 and season 4 endocrinologists to talk about all this stuff, so that women especially can understand our hormones and how, to minimize some of these things. And I'm recently pregnant, so it's like I'm even more aware right now. Thank you. Of these kind of things. And I was reading, 100% of breast milk has PFAS in it. And it's just little things like that that really make me question things, and why I really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom with all of us. Because it's not something the average consumer, average citizen, average worker thinks about on the day-to-day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think most people, when they go shopping at the store, I think most folks assume that the products that they buy for their families are safe. And, when we peel back the curtain, when we take a closer look, I think most folks would be surprised that there are harmful chemicals that are lurking in everyday products all around us. And those can pose risks to communities and the workers where they're made, but also we as consumers as well. And that's, again, why we think that retailers can play a really crucial role in acting, because customers today are more informed than they were, I would say, even 5 or 10 years ago. I think folks are waking up to realize that, there is PFAS chemicals in food packaging, and there might be, bisphenol S in the thermal receipt paper at the checkout aisle, or there might be phthalates in my kids' shampoo or in my perfume. So I think things are changing, and retailers are hearing that. Like when we talk to companies like Walmart or Target, or even you'd be surprised, even fast food chains, they're telling us that, we're not just hearing this from you as this, NGO, but we're hearing this from our customers. Customers today want to know that businesses are being more responsible about the public health and the environmental sustainability impact of products. And that includes the chemical safety of products and packaging. And we're really excited that companies have been responsive. And since we've started this campaign and started this report card, we've seen tremendous movement in the market over the last 5 years since we've been publishing this report card. So if we take a look at that first set of, actually it was 11 companies that we first evaluated back in 2016. Back then, their grades were awful. The average grade was a D+, D as in dog. Today, 5 years later, their scores have improved from a D+ to a B-. Many of the companies we first started evaluating in the campaign and engaging had no chemical policies at all. Wow. And now today, years later, many of them do. So Amazon, Home Depot, Lowe's, Walgreens, Rite Aid, all of these companies are just a few of many examples of companies that have made notable progress in beginning to address the chemical safety and the chemical footprint of the products that they sell in their stores. And that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there are companies that are laggards. And so our campaign is continuing to call on companies to improve, because there are so many challenges that still remain. But I am really optimistic, because we've seen that we can make change. We've gotten bisphenol A out of baby bottles. We've gotten flame retardants out of furniture. We're having a massive effect in driving PFAS out of food packaging. So we've seen the change that we can make, and we really need to put our foot on the gas pedal and continue to drive further progress in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask you later on, how us as consumers and citizens can get involved in supporting you. But I do want to call out a few of the brands, that aren't necessarily doing great, like Nordstrom's and Macy's. Starbucks, I saw, had an F. A few big ones, ladies and gentlemen, that you probably support. Just check out the retailer report card, because I think you'll be pretty interested, and you guys break it down in a really easy way for consumers to understand, like, what you're graded and everything. One of the things that you've mentioned, chemicals of high concern. So there are a few, I'm assuming my listener is like, well, what are the chemicals? Like, you've kind of like dipped in here and there. You've talked about BPA and PFAS. There's obviously a huge list. We're not going to list 10,000 chemicals today, but out of your, from your perspective, what are some chemicals that we should be aware of? And then I would love to switch gears and chat a little bit about PFAS.
Yeah. There's literally thousands of chemicals that are out there on the market. There's over 80,000, and of those 80,000 plus, there's definitely at least 2,000 to 3,000. Actually, more than that when we think of the PFAS class. There are thousands of chemicals that scientists have identified as problematic from a public health perspective. Some of the ones that we're especially concerned about that we've been working on recent years, in addition to PFAS, and we'll talk about PFAS in a minute. One class of chemicals we're concerned about are phthalates, which are used in everything from vinyl plastic products like vinyl flooring that you might have in your home to beauty and personal care products. These are endocrine disrupting chemicals that are linked to birth defects in baby boys. They've been linked to neurodevelopmental effects, so negative impacts on the brain. They've also been linked to asthma in young children. So phthalates are one of the classes of chemicals we're very concerned about, that we've been engaging companies to reduce and eliminate, and we've seen lots of progress there in recent years. Another class of chemicals we're concerned about are flame retardants, especially the halogenated flame retardants, which can be, historically, were found in furniture. We've had a lot of success in driving them out of furniture and other textiles. They can also be found in certain building products like insulation, and they can also be found in electronics. Electronics are the biggest use. So if you have a flat screen TV in your home, chances are there's a very high chance that that TV may contain pretty high levels of these toxic flame retardants. And one of the concerns there is that, if you think about it, the flame retardants are in the plastic, and because they're not chemically bound to the plastic, they can migrate out. And scientific studies have shown that people that have homes with electronics like TVs, folks, you as a consumer will have higher levels of these flame retardants inside your home, particularly in the dust inside your home. And studies have found that we as consumers can be then exposed to those chemicals because, the chemicals are in the dust. You wipe your hand on a table, your kids might be crawling on the floor. Right. The flame retardants settle into the dust. Your kid may put their hand in their mouth. They can then be exposed to the flame retardants, or, the chemicals get into the dust, you touch it, you then are eating dinner, you're eating lunch, then you ingest it. But also pets. Studies have found that cats, for example, and dogs have elevated levels of flame retardants in their bodies. So that's one of the phthalates, and flame retardants are two key classes of chemicals that we're working to engage major retailers and also policymakers, folks in government, to reduce and eliminate. Sadly, companies like Samsung and Hisense and Best Buy have not been doing enough to address flame retardants in electronics, and that's definitely a key issue that we're concerned about. But yeah, phthalates and flame retardants are two examples of classes of chemicals that consumers should definitely work to minimize when possible, but also, we'll talk about this later, reach out to the businesses that you support and ask them what are they doing to address these chemicals in their products.
Yeah.
And everything from flame retardants in electronics to phthalates in plastics that you may be interacting with.
I'm curious as for technology like TV or your, I don't know if computer, well, TV, as you mentioned, have flame retardants. If it's like harder for them to get a safer alternative, like furniture, you could use wool. There are other alternatives that are maybe, safe, alternatives. But I wonder what the alternatives would be for a TV with flame retardants. That's something I don't know very much about.
Well, if you think about it, flame retardants used to also be very common. These brominated flame retardants in particular used to be really common in plastic laptops and other plastic computers. And many major computer brands, companies like Apple and HP, actually changed the design of the computers so that they were no longer made out of plastic. They're now made out of metal, and that minimized the need for these toxic flame retardants. So sometimes we can actually design our way out of the problem by switching the materials that are used. So the reason that the flame retardants are the main reason that they're in these televisions is because the televisions are made out of plastic, also because it has a heat source, but plastic is fundamentally flammable. So companies can innovate and pursue design solutions, switch, for example, from plastic to metal, and that would minimize the need for these chemicals in the first place.
That is awesome.
It's worth noting that just recently the state of New York passed legislation that will, once the governor signs it, ban these chemicals in televisions. European Union is already doing this. About a year or two ago, European Union passed new regulations that bans flame retardants in electronic television enclosures, and that went into force this April. So this is already happening in Europe.
Okay.
The state of New York is beginning to move in this direction once that legislation goes into force. So there are solutions in reach.
Yeah.
We just really need to create the political will and demand to create the change, because there are solutions literally sitting on the shelf right now. Companies like Samsung and Hisense just haven't done enough work to really make the switch. And we're hopeful that they will, particularly given the policy momentum in New York and within the European Union as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for that. Thank you for answering that question.
Yeah.
I do, our time is waning. I feel like I guess I'm really passionate about this topic, and I could chat with you for a really long time about all these things. But PFAS is something that I've kind of been doing a deep dive in, and I think a lot of my consumers, and I love cooking. A lot of the stuff that I focus on is nutrition related as well. So I started looking at PFAS from like a cookware standard, but the deeper I dug into it, the more I realized this is in our food packaging, as you mentioned, it's in our clothing. So what are PFAS for anyone who's not familiar with this chemical? And is it even possible to avoid this chemical?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoro-alkyl substances. It is a large family of chemicals, often referred to as highly fluorinated chemicals. So they're made with fluorinated chemicals, and they're used to make products. I think most folks will probably be familiar with the idea of like Teflon pans. So.
Right.
They can be found in products like Teflon pans. They can also be found in food packaging. So our testing last year found high levels of fluorine in the packaging of the Whopper at Burger King and the Big Mac at McDonald's. So food packaging is a big area where they're found. They're often added to products to make them stain or water or grease resistant. For that reason, they also could be found in clothing, things like rain jackets, furniture, and other textiles. So they can be found in rain jackets sold by brands like Patagonia and retailers like REI and Dick's Sporting Goods. And they can also be found in firefighting foam, foam that's used in airports to put out fires, which, by the way, is a big source of drinking water contamination around this country. Millions of Americans, according to researchers at Harvard, there's probably at least 7 to 10 million Americans whose drinking water has become contaminated from the use of PFAS and firefighting foam.
Man.
So it's used in literally thousands of products, but these are some of the ones that we're especially concerned about, that we know where solutions are in reach: Teflon pans, food packaging, clothing, and other textiles. And we're concerned about these chemicals, especially because, one, they can be quite hazardous at very low levels of exposure. And we know this because studies looking at the communities and the workers downstream and in places where DuPont and 3M made these chemicals, studies found the workers and the communities that lived around these plants were getting sick. And then also we're concerned not only because these chemicals are hazardous, but especially because these chemicals are extremely persistent in the environment. They can persist in the environment for hundreds, likely thousands of years. The carbon-fluorine bond is, scientists tell me, is the strongest in nature. So they don't degrade in the environment. So if the PFAS chemicals are released into the environment, so when we think of the food packaging, you take your kids to McDonald's or Burger King, they get a Big Mac or Whopper, they eat it. And, I used to work at McDonald's, so this is not to diss them per se, but, the packaging is used once. The chemicals then make their way to a landfill or incinerator. Chemicals don't degrade. They can then make their way into the environment. They can for example, contaminate the groundwater, maybe the drinking water near a landfill. Or if the packaging is incinerated, a lot of our food packaging waste gets dumped in incinerators. We don't believe that the incineration destroys the chemicals.
Oh my gosh.
It just transports them elsewhere, right? And then the air emissions from the incinerators can send the chemicals, literally hundreds of miles. Those chemicals eventually may settle on the ground, and then maybe in some cases, certainly landing on crops, and then getting back into the food supply. So all of us are exposed to PFAS chemicals day in and day out. Whether or not you eat food packaging from McDonald's or Burger King, or wear a rain jacket at REI, this is an issue that affects every single one of your listeners, every single American. We actually just published a study a couple weeks ago or a month ago, and we tested a random sampling of moms. We tested their breast milk in Seattle, Washington area, just because that's where one of our main offices is. And every single sample that we collected, we found measurable levels of these PFAS chemicals in the women's breast milk. And that's, of course, a concern because, we often think of, women's breast milk as being pure and, the most ideal food for our babies to eat and drink. And that's true. We're not saying that women should stop breastfeeding. Breast milk is still best, but we think it is, we think it's a moral failure of our society that nature's purest food is being contaminated by industrial chemicals made by big chemical corporations like DuPont and Chemours and 3M for products that in some cases we're only using them once, right? There's no reason why we should be making chemicals that contaminate our drinking water, that contaminate our communities, and contaminate women's breast milk. And that's why we're calling on big companies like Burger King to get it out of their food packaging, outdoor apparel chains like REI to get it out of rain gear. And there are, again, solutions in reach. We've had a lot of success in recent years beginning to drive PFAS out of key sectors. Just this past year, we got McDonald's and Taco Bell and Sweetgreen and Chipotle to agree to ban these chemicals in food packaging. Meanwhile, Burger King is still allowing its use. So there are solutions in reach, but again, we're working to create enough consumer demand to call on these big corporations to act.
Yeah. From a consumer perspective, like let's say I'm a mom and I get my kid, McDonald's or whatever, or let's say Burger King in this case, because they still use PFAS. Yes, the wrapper itself is something that if I dispose of could obviously, as you mentioned, when it's incinerated or not degrade the chemical last. But am I absorbing? I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do you absorb it if it's like warmed up? You know, if the burger is warm, does
Yeah.
it leach into food?
Yeah, it can. Yeah. Studies have shown that PFAS chemicals can migrate from the packaging into the food. So that is one of the reasons why we're concerned about its
Mm-hmm.
use, key reason why we're concerned about its use in packaging.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there's evidence that suggests that when you heat up the food, when you microwave it,
Yeah.
when you're putting warm food in the wrapper, that could increase the chances that the chemicals can migrate out and get into the food.
Okay.
So absolutely, and that's a key reason why we're advocating
Yeah.
for it to be banned in food packaging. And I should mention that we're not only working to get this chemical banned, you know, at big corporations, at big retailers, but we're also working to enact policy change at the state level and at the federal level. So in food packaging, a number of states around the country in recent years have actually passed legislation banning PFAS chemicals in food packaging. So the state of Washington, the state of New York, Maine, just recently Vermont and Connecticut, Minnesota, in recent years have passed laws that will be banning PFAS chemicals in the years ahead. So that's great.
Yeah.
But we think everyone should be protected, whether, you know, if you don't live in one of those states,
Yeah.
right,
Right.
you may not be protected. So we're also working to get federal legislation enacted to protect everyone. So we're working at the corporate level to get big companies like McDonald's and Burger King, Taco Bell to ban its use. And then we're also working at the state level and the federal level.
That's great.
So one thing that your listeners can do today is to reach out to your representatives, particularly at the federal level, and urge them to support legislation to ban PFAS in food packaging.
Yeah.
Any day now, actually, by the time this story comes out, legislation should be introduced by Representative Dingell from Michigan that is being introduced that would ban PFAS in food packaging. And we're hopeful that we can move this in the months and the year ahead.
That's great.
So one action item that listeners can do is reach out to your representatives, your members of Congress, in the House and in the Senate, and ask them to support Representative Dingell's legislation to ban PFAS chemicals in food packaging. That would really make a big difference in protecting consumers.
Yeah, and I think even on your website you guys have a few petitions and things like that, correct? So where can people where can they connect with what you're working on, and how can they support what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. So a couple of things. One, if you go to our website at saferchemicals.org, we have petitions that are on there that are working to enact policy change at the federal level to protect consumers and communities and workers from chemicals like PFAS. So go to saferchemicals.org, and also go to our retailer report card website that we talked about in the beginning. You could sign a petition to the dozen companies that earned letter grades of F that are failing to meaningfully protect consumers and communities and workers from toxic chemicals. As I mentioned, there were 12 companies, a dirty dozen list of companies that are not doing enough to take action on chemicals. And by going to our website, if you click the Get Involved or Take Action button, you can send an email to the leadership, to the CEOs of these dozen companies that earn failing grades, and urge them to take action on chemicals like PFAS and develop systemic safer chemical policies.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And I highly encourage everyone again to check that out, because that is an easy way. And I'll link everything up here in the show notes. So it's literally a click away, and just sign it. And I do think after listening to this, I think this is actually a topic a lot of people have reached out to me and asked about, because they just find it to be something interesting they just don't know much about.
Right,
so
right.
I do want to say, like, one of the positive things from this is, yes, it does seem like, okay, we have so many chemicals, it's doom and gloom, but it does sound like you're also, like you said, you're hopeful, you're encouraged that you are seeing change. And I guess I'm curious, like, throughout your career, what has been the biggest change that you've seen, just to give us a little bit of hope here?
Yeah. I'm really glad that you asked that, because I mean, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, there's no solution, everything gives you cancer, or the government is corrupt, whatever. But, over the last 20 years, and especially the last 10 years of my career, I've just seen so much momentum. 10 years ago, you would go to a Target or a Walmart or Toys R Us, and all the baby bottles were loaded with bisphenol A. Or you would go buy a piece of furniture at a furniture store, and all the furniture contained toxic flame retardants. And that's not the case anymore, right? If you go to a store, baby bottles don't contain bisphenol A anymore. Furniture, 99% of the time, new furniture does not contain toxic flame retardants anymore. And that's massive. I mean, these products used to be key ways in which we and our families were exposed to some of these really fundamentally hazardous chemicals. And that's just two examples of ways in which we have been working to protect consumers through government action at the state level, government action at the federal level, and through our corporate accountability campaigns, through campaigns like Mind the Store. I mean, we as consumers have incredible power to drive change. Every day I talk to retailers, and they tell me that when customers reach out to them to ask them, hey, does this food packaging contain PFAS? Does this television contain flame retardants? Does this receipt paper contain bisphenol S? Simple questions like that really do make a difference. So another thing that you can do is not only sign our petition, but send your own personal emails to the businesses that you support. Ask them, you can contact customer service or talk to the store manager, ask them questions about the ingredients and products, because companies pay attention to that sort of thing. That can really send major shockwaves through a business. We have consumers have incredible power to drive change. It was really consumers, 10, 15 years ago that played a huge role in getting bisphenol out of baby bottles and flame retardants out of furniture. So we're working to continue to harness that power of consumers to drive change. So go to our website, saferchemicals.org, get involved in our federal advocacy to ban PFAS in food packaging, and go to our website at retailerreportcard.com, send a message to the CEOs of the companies in the Toxic Hall of Shame, and then share the website with your friends and family members on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever channels you like, because that can really be a powerful way also to spread the word and make change. Just sharing this information on social media can also be really powerful and impactful. And then finally, if any of you are on TikTok, we just launched a new mascot for our campaign. Her name is Polluted Polly. So if you check out tiktok.com/@pollutedpolly, check out our new mascot. For those of you listeners that are on TikTok, check out Polluted Polly. That might be a little bit, it's our fun new mascot we launched. So check that out as well.
I love that. So TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. Check out your website. Mike, this is so wonderful, and I really appreciate your time. I know my listeners have just gained so much inspiration and wisdom, so thank you for your time. This has been really great. I guess I have two last questions for you. Is there anything we haven't covered before I let you go that you think is important to share with my listeners?
Anything that I haven't gotten? I guess the other thing that I would say is that in addition to advocating for policy change at the government level, advocating for change at the corporate level, there are also simple steps that we can take as consumers to protect ourselves. We have tons of information on our website at saferchemicals.org on steps that we all can take on our daily lives to minimize our exposure to harmful chemicals. So that's just one other plug for the website, saferchemicals.org. If you take action, you'll also automatically get added to our email newsletter, where we also include information, tips on things that we as consumers can do to also protect our families day in and day out from exposure to harmful chemicals and everyday products lurking around us.
Great, thank you. And my final question for you is, what does it mean to you to be a wise consumer?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really like that. I would say that being a wise consumer to me means taking personal responsibility for the actions thinking about, what businesses do we support where we shop? What are the companies we support? What types of products we do and don't buy? And, being more educated and thoughtful about the massive impacts that can have up and down global supply chains, especially in our globalized society. At the same time, I think that's also recognizing that it's not just about personal responsibility, but it's also about this idea that we can't shop our way out of these problems.
Right.
We can certainly be wise consumers and protect ourselves, but being a wise consumer is also being a wise citizen, and recognizing that we really need fundamental reform at all levels of government and in corporate boardrooms across the world. So we really need systemic change. So being a wise consumer is also trying to think about what are the personal steps we can take, but also going above and beyond that and advocating for more systemic changes, because without those systemic changes, we never can be a totally wise consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think my listeners will absolutely agree with you on that. So, Mike, thank you so much for your time. This was such a wonderful conversation. I look forward to continuing supporting you in the work that you're doing and promoting, all the new, I do follow the news releases, and it just inspires me to keep, doing what I can in my neck of the woods. So thank you for what you do with Mind the Store and all your colleagues.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for, using your outlet with the podcast to have folks like myself on to share our perspective and educate consumers about steps that they can take to be more wise consumers. So thank you so much for all that you do. It takes a village, and all of us have a role to play.
Yep. Thank you so much. All right, friend, that about wraps it up, but this convo does not have to end here. I would love to hear from you, so please send your questions and comments my way. And if there's a topic you want to hear more about, send me a DM on Instagram @TheWiseConsumer or email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com and let's chat. In the meantime, could I ask you to do me a huge favor, please? I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes out of your day to subscribe to my show and leave me a review if you haven't already. You can do so in the iTunes app. It's that purple icon that comes preloaded on most smartphones, but I've also linked it up in the show notes if you're not sure how to access it. Anyway, that wraps it up for today. So until next time, friend, be safe, stay healthy, and take care. Hi, friends. As always, just ending this episode with my obligatory disclaimer. Please remember, the wise consumer is intended for educational purposes only. The content being shared here should not be used as a substitute for professional care by your healthcare provider. I am not a qualified medical expert, nor do I pretend to be, so please note that the content and research I share and explore on this podcast is not intended to treat or diagnose you. If you have any medical questions, concerns, or wish to make changes to your diet, please speak to your physician or any qualified healthcare professional for that matter. The wise consumer may not be held responsible for your health, dietary, or lifestyle decisions. I am simply here to encourage you to seek healthier, more eco-friendly, and conscious alternatives. While the Wise Consumer podcast offers information from many sources, the opinions expressed are solely those of the Wise Consumer and not those of any affiliate or other entity. Additionally, while I always do my best to source and research the most up-to-date and accurate information, I realize science is continually evolving. If you come across any scientific information that is blatantly incorrect, please kindly email me at hello@thewiseconsumer.com. And finally, this podcast and any other offerings of The Wise Consumer may contain copyrighted material, the use of which has not always been specifically authorized by the copyright owner because it is being used for educational purposes. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this podcast or any other offerings of The Wise Consumer for purposes of your own that go beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner.